Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. It looks like we just went live. We'll give it a couple of minutes, but we're excited that you're joining us, and we have a great lineup of speakers that we hope you'll stay and listen to. Feel free, if you have access to the chat, you can share where you're calling in from, share a little bit about yourself. We'd love to know who's joining us today, and we'll get started in a minute or so. Welcome to everyone joining us. I think I'll get started as people come in. Thanks so much for joining us today. If you're tuning in on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, we appreciate you joining us. Tonight, we're going to talk about clean transportation and the transition that's happening in that realm. And we're specifically going to talk about a deep dive into EPA's Clean School Bus program that's bringing new electric school buses to districts around the nation. So we're luckily joined by a panel of experts in the clean transportation and environmental field. We're going to hear from representatives from the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, the Electrification Coalition, Mom's Clean Air Force, and the Environmental Defense Fund. First, we'll receive a quick briefing on what the Clean School Bus program is. Then we'll dive into a panel discussion on the importance of clean transportation and how federal policies are being implemented in each of our states. Before we hear from our speaker panel, we're going to play a quick video that recaps an event we hosted this year in Phoenix. This event told the story of how an elementary school district in Arizona is transitioning to electric transportation solutions to protect the health of their community and its families and its children. So behind the scenes, we'll have someone playing that, and check it out now.
Grew up with severe asthma all through elementary school, and I was in and out of the hospital for most of kindergarten, first and second grade.
Phoenix, Arizona suffers from some of the nation's most toxic air, according to data from the American Lung Association. Persistently high levels of particle and ozone pollution increase the risk that kids develop asthma, bronchitis, and other respiratory conditions, as well as anxiety and depression.
I've watched children over and over again have asthma attacks. I watched a little girl almost die from an asthma attack waiting for her school bus.
More days in the doctor's office or the hospital mean fewer in the classroom. The problem is particularly acute among Phoenix's communities of color, who are more likely to live close to major highways, freight hubs, and high-traffic areas. Ironically, vehicles meant to shuttle our kids back and forth from their places of learning are a big part of the problem. Diesel exhaust from school buses is a significant contributor to the air pollution plaguing Phoenix and many other communities across the country. That's why this West Phoenix school district decided to apply for federal money to replace its dirty diesel buses with a safer option. On May 9th, we joined Dr. Mario Ventura, superintendent of Isaac School District in West Phoenix, and our partners at Mom's Clean Air Force and Chispa, Arizona, to celebrate a $2.37 million grant from the Environmental Protection Agency's Clean School Bus program. With this money, Isaac Schools will begin to swap its old diesel buses with new electric models.
We were very fortunate to receive this grant and for 6 electric buses, but we are applying, and we know this is very important. I do not know one superintendent that did not apply. In fact, they were kind of, there's a little bit of jealousy going on amongst all of us, like, why did you get it, not us? And we're going to ask for more. We will continue to advocate for these electric buses because we know how important it is for our community.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Emma, for playing that video. Emma is the brains of this operation behind the scenes. But next, we're going to go on to move into a summary of the Clean School Bus program that they talked about in the video. just so that we're all aware of how it works and what it is. And I'm excited to welcome Volpe Vo, environmental engineer at the Environmental Protection Agency. Welcome, Volpe. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for introducing me. So I'll just go over a little bit about the Clean School Bus Program as in the most general way possible. So the Clean School Bus Program is part of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and it looks to fund zero or low emission buses for school districts. This program provides $5 billion over 5 years, and we're currently going into the second year of funding. The first round of funding was a rebate in 2022, followed by a grant program this year that just closed recently. And there will likely be another rebate coming up sometime this fall, very, very soon. And the grant program, just to provide some explanation between the differences between the grant program and the rebate program, grants provide more flexible funds for schools than the rebate, but they are very competitive and must follow a strict set of rules. Meanwhile, on the other hand, rebates are less flexible in how their funds can be used, but they're very easy to apply for and usually, they're easier to apply for. And with our last rebate program, there was a lottery that people applied for and people were randomly selected. So it wasn't graded like the grants were. And in the rebate program, there were separate fixed funds for buses and infrastructure, and in the grants this year, it was a combined funding. In the grant program that just closed recently, there was the option for third parties to apply on behalf of school districts, and this allowed for a maximum of 100 school buses to be distributed among multiple school districts, as opposed to the maximum of 50 school buses if each of the school districts applied to on their own. The rebate program releasing in the fall this year coming up may follow these guidelines, or they might not. It's really unclear what it will do, but hopefully we'll know when it releases. So why electric buses? Why propane and natural gas buses instead of diesel? So since children are shorter and closer to the ground, they're closer to the exhaust pipes of the diesel-powered school buses and the fumes that come from that. And they also breathe at a quicker rate than adults, which allows them to be more vulnerable to the hazardous pollutants from these buses, which is why we want to emphasize clean school buses for school districts. And in the video, it said that children are more likely to report sick, and especially children with asthma are more likely to stay home from school or be hospitalized even. And we look to provide funding for schools in prioritized communities to upgrade their diesel school buses. Prioritized school districts include low income or high need, rural, and tribal schools. These prioritized communities normally would not be allowed to purchase electric school buses due to their higher initial upfront costs of these buses. And we want to bridge the gap between the funding difficulties that these prioritized schools experience and purchasing these buses. So I'll go into how the first round of funding went. So the first round of funding was a rebate in 2022, and that was a huge success. Schools were awarded based on the lottery system, like I said before. So if the schools met certain threshold criteria and when they applied, then they were randomly awarded. The 2022 rebate program only intended to award $500 million, but due to the popularity of the and the news coverage of the program, we increased it to almost $1 billion. It was increased to $965 million during the rebate. And we ended up awarding 961 million of that 965 million. And 415 school districts were awarded, with both of the schools applying for electric buses for a total of 2,609 electric and low emission buses. So I talked briefly about how we prioritize schools. And just to go over it again, it's for low income areas, rural remote, or rural distant, or if you're a tribe. And these prioritized school districts receive more money than if you're non-prioritized for both the buses and the chargers or any infrastructure related to infrastructure costs related to that. And yeah, so hopefully look forward for the rebate. All the information will be on epa.gov/clean school bus. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Volpe. It was super helpful to hear about that program, and I know we're all excited to be here to learn more about it. So now I'm super excited to welcome the rest of our panelists. Obviously, Volpe is going to be here again, an environmental engineer at the EPA, still with us for this panel. And then next, we have Emma Hines, who is a policy manager with the Electrification Coalition. She focuses on federal policy advocacy and state advocacy in North Carolina and Wisconsin. She's calling in from Wisconsin today, and she's focused on policy research and analysis to ensure policymakers create and support strong policies to electrify our nation's transportation sector. And next, we have Melody Reese, my coworker at Moms Clean Air Force. She's our senior legislative and regulatory policy manager. She oversees our engagement with Congress, the White House, and the EPA. And before joining EDF and Moms Clean Air Force, Melody spent nearly a decade as a policy staffer on Capitol Hill. So she's calling in today from Washington, D.C. Last, we have Allie Dysard, who is a senior policy specialist at the Environmental Defense Fund. She's focused on advancing electric vehicle policies in Florida and beyond. And obviously, she's calling in today from Florida. So welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being here. So first, let's just start with the basics. We want to talk about why shifting to electric transportation plays such an important role in addressing the climate crisis and advancing our nation's transition to a clean energy economy. So how is the transportation sector currently causing negative public health outcomes, worsening the climate crisis, and sort of what can we do about that?
Well, I can get started just talking about kind of the public health angle as well as touching a little bit on climate. But, you know, the current state of our school transportation fleet, there's almost 500,000 buses. I think it's 480,000 buses that are going through our communities every day, taking kids to school and back. And nearly all of those buses are diesel buses. And that's a problem for us because diesel buses produce like two major types of pollution that we're concerned about. They produce air pollution as well as climate pollution. Diesel is a fossil fuel. So when you burn it, it again produces like all types of different kinds of air pollution, as well as greenhouse gas emissions, which cause climate change. So diesel exhaust in terms of public health, it's a known carcinogen. When you breathe it in, it can lead to problems like respiratory illnesses as well as heart issues. And so one reason why we really like electric school buses is because they don't have exhaust. They don't have tailpipes. They're zero emission. So there's nothing coming out of there, whether it's climate pollution or greenhouse gas emissions.
Thanks, Melody. Does anyone else want to chime in on that first question?
Sure, I'll say just a little bit. So something that, we talk a lot about at the Electrification Coalition is, the U.S.'s dependence on oil and how outsized of a footprint we actually have. So many people think, to operate our transportation system, everybody has to use oil. We're not using any more than the rest of the world, but that's actually really not true. So the U.S. uses about 20% of the daily oil demand, but we only have about 4% of the population. So of the world. So this is a really outsized footprint for our country. And I think it's important to kind of focus on, as we're heading into this transportation shift, if we have a really large footprint comparatively.
Totally. Yeah, that's a great point, Emma. Thanks for sharing. Allie, do you want to weigh in at all on this one?
I feel like Melody and Emma covered it pretty well. I'll say for Florida down here, our transportation footprint is about 30 to 40% of all the pollution and greenhouse gas emissions that we have down here. So cutting 30 to 40%, especially with kind of the low hanging fruit, like electric school buses, like transit buses, vehicles that have like a known route and do the exact same route every day and come back to the same hub and have, very few miles throughout the day, maybe 100, that kind of thing. It's kind of the easiest first step for us to take. And that's why we're really, enthusiastic about the Bill and IRA and the Clean School Bus programs.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Sally. That's actually a great segue into our next question. So the Clean School Bus program was created by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which is an awesome example of something we've all been advocating for and urged our elected officials to vote for. And so now seeing that actually happening and impacting people on the ground is super exciting for all of us. So are there other funding opportunities available to help interested school districts transition to cleaner buses?
Good.
Okay, I'll just say short answer, yes. Long answer for that is there's a lot of different great opportunities. So the Clean School Bus program, is kind of the first of its kind, one-stop shopping. You can get money for the bus, the entire bus, the charging infrastructure, things like that. But for some school districts, they're looking for other sources of funding. And so I have a couple that I'll, mention, and then there's a couple that I won't mention because there's far too many, which is an awesome position to be in. So the first one I'll talk about is the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act. And so that's abbreviated DERA. And that's an EPA program, and that one's actually been around for a pretty long time. It's been around since 2008. So it started as, diesel particulate filter funding, and now, and I think I might be cutting out, or no? I'll keep talking. So that one started out as diesel particulate matter filtering, but now you can use that money for electric school buses. Another one is going to be the Environmental and Climate Justice Block Grant, and that's also distributed through EPA. And that one is eligible for electric school buses if you're in a disadvantaged community, which is really well defined on the EPA website. But the short version of that is you meet an environmental indicator and a socioeconomic indicator. So that could look like high air quality burdens and low socioeconomic status of the community. But there's a bunch of different options. And then the last one I'll mention is the Grants for Energy Efficiency in Public Schools grant, which is from the DOE. So that is not eligible for the bus, but it is eligible for the charging infrastructure. So if you're looking for some supplemental funding, it's a great opportunity. But I've only mentioned 3 examples and I'm already confusing myself. So I think Emma is going to be dropping a link in the chat from a resource that we have at the Electrification Coalition. It's called the EV Funding Finder. I do this professionally and have a hard time getting through the federal grant website sometimes. So how can we expect kind of your average person to do it? But it's a really great, choose your own adventure style tool, I call it, where you get to pick what entity you represent and then what kind of transportation infrastructure or vehicle you're trying to purchase. And it gives you a really nice clean list of everything you're eligible for. And it gets updated monthly as we get new guidance. So just wanted to drop that resource, but that's my answer.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, it looks like Emma, the other Emma behind the scenes, put that link scrolling down at the bottom of your screen. I'm curious if anyone else wants to weigh in on that. I know Emma gave a very comprehensive answer though, so.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I have a list of other alternative funding opportunities, and none of her 3 were on my list, and I have a pretty long list as well, but I'll only mention a couple. We used the VW settlement money a couple of years ago to get about 218 electric school buses throughout 7 counties in our state. I've also seen some programs where school districts have partnered with the local utility system to get some funding there, because you will be charging with the local utilities. So they're kind of excited about this program. In some cases, the school buses are actually selling back in the summer when the school buses aren't running and they're just sitting there. They're sending back the electricity, and they're making about $10,000 per school bus. So there's some funding opportunities there if you kind of contractually work with your utility company. And then there's also federal tax incentives and different rebates. And then there's also some at the state. And in Florida, we actually have some at the county level as well.
Awesome. Lots of different ways to get money, it sounds like. That's really exciting. Melody or Volpe, do you want to weigh in at all? Or again, we've covered a lot, so it's okay.
Yeah, I think that was pretty comprehensive. Just backing up what Ali said, I mean, there are definitely states that are starting to, I think partially from seeing how much interest there was in the Clean School Bus program and seeing how many schools applied, and, there just wasn't enough funding to go around. So I think we've seen states like Michigan put a lot of money into their state budget to create programs of their own that should be rolling out soon. And so, I think if you're excited about electric school buses, make sure you're talking about it to your state and local officials, because state and local funding could be an opportunity as well.
And I would just, I'd like to add that So with the EPA's Clean School Bus program, we don't allow other federal funds to be added onto funding the cost of whatever school bus you might be getting. So with these state grants and other non-federal grants, you can combine those and put it help you fund your school buses. So it's really good, if especially since we don't give all the money in the world, so that it might not cover the complete cost of the school bus or the infrastructure or both together. So those are really good opportunities to apply for.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for sharing, everyone. And it's super exciting to just hear about the success of the program and how there's such a demand for this type of funding. It was also super helpful earlier to hear Volpe's overview of the program. But I think now it'd be great to dive into how the implementation and the funding really work. So how does a school system go about electrifying their school bus fleet, and how is the government ensuring that we actually have the charging infrastructure in place for increased electric school buses and increased electric vehicles on our roads?
Yeah, so what we always emphasize first is speaking with your local utility provider. They will let you know everything in charge in reference to the infrastructure. So if the chargers, what kind of chargers you'll need for what kind of school bus you'll be getting. And they'll also probably give you a quote of how much the chargers will be as well. And you can take that into consideration when you're applying for the grant or rebate program. And they will also do a site analysis of your existing electrical load and let you know how many or what upgrades will be needed to support the additional load from electric school buses, because they do take a lot of electricity. And if you're getting really fast chargers, and they're going to take even more than expected. And everything goes well with the utility providers, and the next step is organizing the inventory of the buses that you'd like to upgrade or replace. So we don't just give you money to buy brand new electric school buses. The school buses will be replacing older buses, or if they're not if they're like 2011 or older, then you don't necessarily have to scrap those buses. You can sell or donate them. So taking an inventory of which ones you want to replace, and probably want to replace the oldest ones because they might be performing the worst in the fleet. Yeah, depending on what type of bus it is, it'll have to be either scrapped, sold, or donated. And we recommend the school districts to reach out to several bus OEMs to get quotes and find buses that will meet the needs of the school district. OEMs are, I forgot what the example, but it's the manufacturers. And they're in charge of the school buses, and they'll let you know which ones you'll need. And depending on the climate or how long your route is, then they will probably tell you which buses to get. They'll do route analysis and let you know if electric school buses are a good fit for your specific use cases. And at the same time you're speaking with the OEMs, make sure to check the funding opportunity on grants.gov and make sure your sam.gov account is up to date. There's a lot of detail. I can go into that, but that's like a whole separate presentation. But after all this preparation, then you will finally want to apply for the grant or rebate on grants.gov. Both will be on there when they're open. And if you're applying for an electric bus funding opportunity, then the EPA award allows part of the money to go towards infrastructure costs as well. And we realize that installing charging infrastructure can be a cost barrier for some school districts. So we want to eliminate as many barriers as possible for these school districts to come in into our programs. And when the applications close, then we at the EPA regions will review the applications and notify awardees sometime after the closing date. Hopefully not too long, but government and all that.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Volpe. It's great to sort of hear about those pieces from the source, since you're in the thick of implementation and making sure this all really works out. I did just want to ask if anyone else wants to add anything, any tips or tricks on that implementation piece and just making sure that these are really getting out there.
I can't emphasize enough to call your utility. They should be the first person you invite to your kickoff call if you're thinking about getting a bus. They are going to be the make or break for this.
Totally.
Yeah. There's also a number of like electrify your fleet resources. I know EDF has one on our website. I think a couple of different OEMs and other partners will have, I think Electrification Coalition has one as well, as how to electrify your fleet, what makes sense, what kind of cost savings you'll see, but definitely starting with utility company first is a great step.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll just pub that Emma behind the scenes has put another great link scrolling at the bottom of your screen. So check that out too. And I'll actually go back to you, Allie. So we know that switching to electric transportation options and clean school buses reduces pollution and helps fight the climate crisis. But what are some of the other benefits to transitioning to clean and electric school buses?
Yeah, absolutely. I will let Melody handle the safety and health aspects of it. But down here in Florida, we talk a lot about the economics and we make the economic case down here. I think we did a study last year. If the entire state of Florida were to electrify all of our school buses, we'd see $100 million annual taxpayer savings. And that, comes out of the residents and constituents' pocketbooks. The school districts themselves were seeing about a 10% cost of ownership over the 12-year life cycle that the bus they had it for. And then it was about, I think, $2,000 in fuel and $4,400 in maintenance. Like Melody said earlier, there's no tailpipe, so there's no emissions. There's less moving parts. They don't need to get oil changes, things like that. So they're a lot easier to maintain and actually saves a lot of money. I think that's what we kind of talk about down here a lot is the economics and then all the funding available, which really helps it make it a good economical choice for school districts to look in that direction.
Totally. Yeah, it's so important to underline that piece that you can cut pollution, you can fight the climate crisis, and also it's totally economical for school districts. So thanks for sharing that, Allie. I know, Melody, you probably have some more insights about the public health benefits if you want to talk about that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we pretty much covered that. So if you want me to just restate, diesel exhaust is extremely toxic. It's a carcinogen. It causes, respiratory and heart issues. And so obviously the zero emissions from the electric school bus are going to be a lot cleaner.
Totally. Yeah. Thanks for restating that. Anyone else want to add in on this question?
Yeah, I will as well. So I think something that doesn't get talked about a lot, but is a really cool case study kind of outside of the normal functions of a school bus is the idea of using it, as a backup battery in disaster relief situations. So as, more areas are getting impacted by, once in a century hurricanes that happen every 3 years or something, we're starting to see the need for more grid resiliency. And depending on the bus that you purchase, there's an opportunity to implement what we call bidirectional charging. And so instead of just plugging in your bus to the grid, you can actually plug your bus back into a building and power that. So if you're looking at, a blizzard situation or a heat wave situation, you can plug essentially a huge external battery back into a school and power it to work the air conditioning or necessary medical equipment or heat in a blizzard or things like that. So it can be really important for communities in terms of climate resiliency.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that, Emma. I think that's one of the most interesting and awesome parts of electric school buses too, that we often don't talk about enough, is that they can be used for battery storage, which is super cool. Volpe, I'll give you some space in case you want to chime in, but no pressure.
Everyone's basically covered everything. I don't have anything else to add. Thank you.
That's all good. Well, Melody, I'll go back to you. So we've heard a little bit about propane buses being an alternative. That's what some people like to talk about. But how do these propane options actually compare to electric school buses?
Yeah, sure. There definitely has been a little bit of attention paid to propane recently. Propane, like diesel, is a fossil fuel. So when you're talking about burning fossil fuels to power your buses, again, you are creating both air pollution and climate pollution. So I've seen some kind of different studies, I guess, comparing the types of air pollution between propane and diesel. We're talking about like nitrogen oxide and particulate matter, carbon monoxide. And I think, depending on which study you're looking at, sometimes like one or the other comes out ahead. But I think the big takeaway for us is that when you're looking at propane and diesel, which are kind of head to head on those air pollutants, electric is much, much lower than both. It's a lot cleaner, definitely on air pollution. Same with climate pollution. I think propane actually has lifetime higher greenhouse gas emissions than diesel and electric. But again, it's kind of similar to the diesel, and then electric is just significantly lower for both measures. So for us, electric is the clear choice and really the only choice if you want to, clean up air pollution as well as climate pollution.
Totally. Thanks, Melody. Yeah, that's super helpful to hear. I think that a lot of times we're looking for lots of different alternatives, but it sounds like electric is definitely the way to go to sort of have the full benefits of these new school buses. Does anyone else want to chime in on that question? Feel free. Okay.
Oh, something really quick. With the Clean School Bus program, we provide a lot less funding for propane buses. So we definitely emphasize applying for the electric school buses, but we also understand that electric school buses are very, very expensive, and the charging infrastructure that comes along with that also adds a lot more money than propane buses. So, we try to emphasize electric school buses, but we also understand that propane buses are cheaper and more affordable for some of these schools. But yeah, electric buses are probably the way to go.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, the upfront cost is a huge problem, which is why we totally appreciate the EPA and all that you're doing, Volpe, to make sure that people are getting this money and communities are getting access to these really, really clean and new options for electric school buses. So with that in mind, I'm sure everyone's really excited to hear about the Clean School Bus Program's funding this year. So the grant application period did just close, but I'm curious when we can expect to see rebate application opportunities open up for school districts.
We're looking for sometime in the fall. We're not exactly sure when, but hopefully very, very soon. Not sure yet, but the differences going forward, we between the 22 rebate and the grant that just closed, there were some changes that we also might not include in the future, such as changing how rural qualifications were. So it was, I believe it was rural, remote, and rural. Well, there are two different, there's three types of rurals, and we changed it to include two, and that might change in the rebate coming up, but hopefully it'll come out very soon, and all the changes will be on there.
Awesome. Yeah, I know you guys are doing a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure that this is a really successful and equitably distributed program. So we definitely appreciate all of that work. I guess in the meantime, would anyone give any tips for people that want to start prepping for those application periods? Is there anything people should start thinking about if they're really ahead of the game?
Well, I would echo some comments we've already heard. Talk to your utilities if you're even remotely thinking about, transitioning to electric, and make sure that your sam.gov registration is up to date and current, or, start one if you don't have one already. That will get you ahead of the game, I think.
Totally. Thanks, Melody.
That's what I was going to say as well. Call your utility.
Yeah, we sound like broken records, but definitely call your utility company. They're the people that'll help you make this happen. So it's good to hear the same thing a couple different times. So I know there's folks on the line here that probably want to take action now in a quick and easy way. You can use the links in the comments and on screen to sign up for communications from Moms Clean Air Force, or to fill out EDF Action's digital petition to commit to contacting your school boards to request funding for clean school buses. By using the links in the chat, you'll become a member and receive the latest tools and updates on how to take action to support clean transportation and clean school buses in your communities and nationwide. So beyond just using those action links, how can our members tuning in today get involved? How can we all contribute to making sure clean school buses and electric transportation opportunities come to all of our communities? So want to hear from each of you about your tips for taking action. I'll start maybe with you, Melody, since I know you're on my team.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think using the links and signing up is a great way to make sure that you're keeping up and hearing about all the ways to support electric school buses. On our alerts, I know we encouraged our members to support important legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, both of which have provided funding for clean transportation. We also, for our members in states where there are opportunities to support funding for electrification, like I mentioned in Michigan with electric school buses, we will send you alerts so that it's very easy with one click to send over a message to your legislator telling them why it's important to vote. Other things that you can do, I think just talking about electric school buses, making sure that people are aware that electric school buses are an option, maybe explaining why diesel is not so great. Sometimes community input can be very important. I know with some of the districts that did win grants and rebates, their school boards actually had to vote on whether or not they wanted to accept that funding. So making sure that people in your community are invested and on board with the transition to cleaner school buses is very important, sometimes for securing that funding and being able to complete the transition.
Totally. Yeah, that's a great tip, Melody. I think in order for this to be super successful, we need everyone to be on the same page and really understand the economic benefits, the climate benefits, and the public health benefits. So just talking to people in your community and anyone that might have a say in this is huge. Allie, I saw you unmute, so.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off of Melody's. We actually had a couple of school districts that were awarded last year, but then their school boards voted it down and they rejected the funding. So definitely getting out there, PTAs, superintendents, county delegates, talking, and even talking to them, now maybe they applied and they're not going to be awarded for another 6, 8, 9 months, and they might not, but getting in front of those decision makers early and letting them know that you want this, so that when it comes down to a vote, it's not the first time they're kind of hearing about the benefits of electric school buses, and it's not the first time that they're hearing that their community wants this, rather than just the transportation manager that maybe completed the form. So definitely hearing from you early and often, I think is very important. It's kind of a all hands on deck to get this stuff moving, especially in states where maybe you don't have a state climate goal. So there's not as much of a need or desire to go after this funding if you don't necessarily have to meet a certain goal by a certain time. I know some states that we work with, have air quality commitment issues in effect that they have to get done by 2030 or 2035. Florida is not one of those. So kind of getting that, working on those issues, if it's important to you, ahead of time and early and often is very important.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's great advice, Allie. Thank you. Emma, do you have something to add?
Sure. My suggestion would be to call your state legislator. We talked about before, Michigan, in their budget process, they added 120 million, I believe, for supplemental funding. And, even if the amount is $1,000 to $5,000 per bus, for some school districts, that can be the make or break of whether or not they're able to afford it. So call your legislators, tell them that it's important to be able to fill those gaps between the federal funding and the actual cost of the bus.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point. And filling those gaps is huge for that upfront cost that we talked about earlier, too. So once we're able to get over that, it definitely becomes really economical. So it's great to cover all the bases and make sure we're really taking advantage of all the funding opportunities that there are. But Volpe, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, to slightly reiterate everyone being on the same page, there's lots of myths going around about electric school buses and how well they perform in certain weathers or certain topographies. And we just want to make it clear that these electric school buses are performing well in, say, cold weather or very hilly terrain. In Colorado, there's some electric buses and in the other Rocky Mountain areas. So having everyone on the same page about like how far these buses can go or how well they perform in certain conditions is really important to make sure that, you know, if people aren't supporting these electric school buses for these reasons, then why? And can we dispel those myths?
Yeah, totally. That's a great point. And I think sort of back to Allie's point too is like, you know, your community the best, right? So figuring out what's going to resonate in your community, in your state, whether it's in Florida, the economic benefits, if you live in cold weather, talking about that and really showing the proof that these electric school buses are working really well and performing really well, even in cold weather, that's huge. So just trying to figure out where people might be hesitant and really filling those gaps. And hopefully we've given you a better background and some more knowledge today to sort of fill those gaps. But I'll open it up if anyone has any sort of last comments, last tips, advice, anything that they want to share before we close it out. Okay. Oh, Emma.
I was just going to say thanks for the opportunity and to EDF for providing this awesome platform to be able to talk about this program. So.
Yeah, well, thanks to all of you. It was great to learn. I know I learned something new today, but we really appreciate all of you taking the time to teach us more about electric school buses and make this a really successful program. So with that, we'll conclude the program. Thanks to everyone online that's joining us, and be sure to check out the links in the comments for some really great resources from EDF and Moms Clean Air Force on electric school buses and on transportation. So thanks again, everyone. Bye-bye.